Hey everyone, thank you for joining Money in Mandarin. Today we're gonna discuss Chinese characters. There's everyone knows that Chinese characters are quite difficult, and we're here to try and demystify Chinese characters for you and see them in a different light. So today we're fortunate enough to have Aaron Posehn here with us. He's the author of the new book chinEASE, which is cleverly titled in my opinion. And thank you, Aaron, for joining us today.
Great, thanks for having me.
Yep. So let's jump right into the reader questions. And
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
a lot of them have been asking me about simplified versus traditional characters. Could you shed some introduction on what simplified and traditional characters are?
Sure. So basically, everybody knows what Chinese that Chinese writing is consistent of Chinese characters. But what some people might not know, or might not know the exact difference, is that there are two systems, or two official systems, basically. Traditional Chinese characters, as you might think, are the ones that were traditionally written. They're more complicated in their forms. They're written in Hong Kong and Taiwan, as well as a lot of overseas Chinese communities. Simplified characters, on the other hand, are ones that the government of China implemented after they took power of the country in 1949. So in the early 50s, in the mid 50s, and basically those characters are simplified, as the name says, and a lot of the strokes were taken out of characters and to make them easier to learn. The reasoning is that it was easier to learn, but I personally, I don't know, I feel like after the 1950s, people might have gotten a better education in general, so more people learned and more people were literate. I mean, these days in Hong Kong and Taiwan, people also learn the traditional Chinese characters. So I don't think it's that traditional is too hard. I think it's just that depends on how focused you are to learn it.
Right. So having said that, Jack had a question. I think he's learning Chinese right now. So he wanted to ask, if he's learning now, which one should he learn, like simplified or traditional?
Right. From a practical standpoint, I would say probably simplified, just because China, being the country that it is, they use simplified. And I think if you want to interact with anything to do with China, if you want to work in China, you're going to have to know simplified characters. That being said, people in China still use traditional characters. It's not like they don't exist there. And I mean, if you're interested in Taiwan, for example, or if you want to learn Cantonese and you go to Hong Kong, then you're going to learn traditional characters too. But like I said, practical standpoint, probably simplified.
All right. So next, Mike Lim and Ark has a common question. Like, they're more familiar with traditional Chinese. I guess part of it is they grew up learning traditional or had early instruction in the traditional form. So their question is, how do you easily understand simplified form if you're already familiar with the traditional?
I don't think there's any specific technique,
Yeah.
but there are things that you can notice about, differences that you can notice about the characters. Whether you want to learn traditional from simplified or you want to learn simplified because you already know traditional. I mean, the way characters were simplified, there's lots of different ways that they were initially simplified. Some of them were taking a piece of the character and simplifying it, and the rest of it was the same. Another way was just getting rid of an entire piece of a character. Maybe I can show you an example, actually. I can see. Are you able to see this? Okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. hopefully you'll be able to see this. So this is that's okay?
Yep.
The traditional character, that's huan yi xi huan, which is the word for like, right? To like. That's the traditional character.
Right.
The simplified is like this. And you'll notice that it's this part that's been changed. The right side is the same. Now, if you go and take another character, sorry, my writing on here is really bad.
No, it's okay.
But you'll notice that
right.
It's the same side. They have those parts in general. Right. That's the same side that was simplified. So I would say if you can learn to recognize the similarities between characters and not think of them as just things with a million strokes in them that you have to learn, but there's different component pieces. Similar component pieces that different characters share.
I have another question from Kenneth. It's not specifically about characters per se in simplified versus traditional, but he wanted to ask, how many characters do you have to master? Well, his question is a bit like three-pronged. First is, how many characters do you have to master into one, have basic survival knowledge, two, having at a level where you could read periodicals and books, and third, to work as an expat in China or in any Chinese-speaking country.
Sure. I think if you just want, the first instance, I think if you just want to get by and your survival living in China, whether it be traveling there for an extended period of time or living there, to be honest, I don't think you need to know any, because the expat communities are so large. A lot of people go to China and they never learn it. They never learn Chinese. And to be honest, I don't think that's a good way to experience another country.
Right.
But it's possible. All you need to really know is the characters for toilet, restaurant, basic characters. And, probably you have less than 20 characters, you'll be fine. But I think your ability to interact with people and experience things is very, it won't be good. So the second one, reading. I think most Chinese people on a daily basis use about probably 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 characters, depending on what they do and what they choose to read. Now, those characters aren't 100% unique from each other. Like I said before, a lot of characters share certain parts, so it's not like you're learning. It's not like maybe in English, 10,000 words and every word is totally different. They're all made up of letters, right? And I mean, it's not the same exactly in Chinese, but that's the comparison I can make. So yeah, maybe 3,000, let's say. If you're gonna live a daily life of a Chinese person in China. The last one was functional working skills, something like that, you said? Yeah, so I think that it depends on what your profession is. For example, if you're a lawyer or a doctor, you're going to have to know different words for things than the average Chinese person knows. I mean, in English, I don't even know what those words are. So, that it really depends on what you're doing. I think if you're for example, and if you're an English teacher, maybe you don't need any Chinese. Right. But I think it really depends on what you're doing. I'd say the standard is for a functional life is probably like 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 daily. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that. So
yeah.
The next question, Chris asks. Actually, he first expressed his frustration with his instructors because he felt that his instructors would push him to memorize because it's the best way to learn, but he feels that it really isn't that effective, especially for him. So he wanted to ask, what are the more natural ways where he could learn Chinese characters aside from just rote memorization?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, to be honest, rote memorization of Chinese characters is the worst. It's not the worst in the worst learning style, but just it's stressful because it's hard. There, you feel sometimes like you're not learning anything. I would say it's probably best to just learn through experience. Like, for example, you're from your surroundings. Say you go to China and you're bombarded with Chinese signs all the time, and if you can, or maybe you want to read maybe a better example would be to get a children's book and to see the characters and just see them in context. I think if you just choose a whole bunch of characters at once and say, okay, memorize these, it's not going to work out that well. Another example that's slightly different but the same is recently I'm trying to learn Japanese now.
Right.
And I'm learning, Japanese uses a lot of Chinese characters, which is usually the hard part for learners of Japanese, but I already have those down. So my challenge is to learn the other writing systems they have, hiragana, katakana. And so I got the charts. But to me, it just looks like a whole bunch of squiggles on the page, and it's very overwhelming.
That's right.
So what I started to do instead of look at those charts is to look at sentences, simple sentences like "Hello, my name is Aaron," and see what Japanese symbols are used in that, and that way I learn sentences too right away, and I'm not stuck only learning how to write some seemingly uninteresting characters. And so, and then as I learn more sentences, those Japanese characters are reinforced because I'm saying them again. And then I found even just after a few days, the few 10 simple sentences I knew, I could pick out right away. Okay, that one got it. That one got it. And Chinese, to be honest, is more difficult, but I think doing it in context is the way to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And to add to that, in my personal experience, I like learning characters that for words that I really use. Like every person has a certain way of speaking. I use certain idioms in English. I use certain verbs, etc. So I try to find equivalent of that in Chinese. Like you do a certain personal inventory of the most commonly words you use, then that's the words you find in Chinese, because that's going to be also the most frequently used words for you when you use Chinese. Instead of learning a random list of 100 words or something, you get an inventory of what you use in English, then find its counterpart in Chinese. So it's more meaningful to you instead of learning words that you don't really use in English. So you probably won't use them in Chinese as well.
Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, if you're not learning words that you're interested in learning, it's going to be a big task. I mean, maybe you'll learn those words because you have to later, but at the beginning, if you can start with something you're interested in or a topic that you're interested in, and you can learn about it in Chinese and read about it that way, then you'll have a much better time.
Okay. There's one last question from the readers that I want to ask you. It's from Julie, and I think it's a good question. Is it easier to write characters once you learn how to speak it, or vice versa? I read from like Benny Lewis from Fluent in 3 Months. His big advocacy is speak from day one. Like practice going out speaking to native speakers. Then eventually characters or the other parts of the language would come easier for you because you have context, like you have experience. Or what's your opinion on that approach?
I do agree with him that I think it's good to speak to at least attempt to speak as soon as you can, or at least as soon as you feel comfortable, as long as that comfort doesn't come 3 years later.
Right.
I mean, just, if you do it as soon as possible. I don't know if being able to speak will help you to learn how to write in the same way that it would in English. The sounds don't match up to the characters not even English, but any language that uses a similar alphabet. I think that I mean, Chinese children, they're fluent before they go to school, right? And then they still have to go and learn characters, and probably, it's not necessarily easy for them. That being said, though, I think that if you know how words are said in Chinese, and then you learn the character for it afterwards, you're putting a picture on. You're applying a picture to what you already know in your head. So, I mean, I think there's a possible connector that you can make there, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily easier. You still have to work and memorize.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess it just depends on which approach is better for you personally. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because even if you're in your mother language, like if you're speaking English, for us it's English or Filipino, you always learn the language. You always learn how to speak it first rather than writing. We use the alphabet for both Filipino and English, but we learn to speak first. So I guess if that's your natural way of learning, it's also a good approach to learn Chinese characters.
Yeah, I think I have a feeling that most people will learn it that way. Chinese, they'll learn how to say some things first and then want to write it after, and so I think that's just the way people will learn it.
And I think it's more exciting, like, to actually use the language in a spoken form, because you get immediate feedback rather than writing it and you have no feedback to anyone if you're doing it right. Like you're not communicating when you're writing. Unlike in spoken form, you get the feel of interaction. So that's gonna make it easier for you to retain what you just spoken.
Exactly. Yeah, I would definitely agree.
So, like, to end, maybe we could have. Do you have any other resources or blogs? Do you follow other writers or language learners that we may suggest to the readers to follow and learn more from?
Yep, definitely. There's Chinese-specific blogs and YouTube channels that I follow, as well as sort of more language-specific blogs and YouTube channels in general. Like you already mentioned, there's Benny Lewis, and I said Moses McCormick. He does often Chinese videos, but also for other languages as well. There's another guy named Mike Campbell, who goes by the name Glossica on YouTube.
Right.
He's a very interesting guy. Lots of languages he talks about, but also Chinese a lot of the time too, as well as English if you want to learn English. So, there's another YouTube channel called Peggy Teaches Chinese. So she's more of a teacher than a talker about language. Blogs that I read, there's one called The World of Chinese, worldofchinese.com, ChineseHacks.com, hackingchinese.com. Yeah, those are the ones off the top of my head.
Right. So I'll post some links to all of those recommendations by Aaron. And finally, we talk about Chinese characters a lot, and there's really a lot more that we haven't talked about. And a lot of them are in Aaron's book, chinEASE. So it's a highly recommended book to read, especially if you're starting out. Because the thing is, when we get excited about learning something, we jump right into it. But taking time to read, like Aaron's book, it's a great supplement for your textbooks, because it gives you the story of the characters rather than just for you to memorize them in rote. So maybe you could invite them, Aaron, to get your book and learn more about Chinese characters.
Yeah. So, like Alan said, like you just said, the book is called chinEASE. That's ChineASE.
Yeah.
So hopefully it will be easy to show that Chinese isn't the monster it's made out to be. Basically, it goes through everything we've talked about as well here. This is an important part of the book. So in the beginning, you sort of learn the essentials of Chinese characters, but then I wanted to show that there's a practical application of this book too, in that you can take the characters you've learned and apply it to how to read numbers, how to read banknotes. There's a whole chapter on how to read a Chinese menu. There's another chapter on how to read business cards. common Chinese names and positions of people, how to address people. Back for the other chapter for learning to read a menu, how to read different types of foods, how to read methods of preparation and methods of cooking, and different types of drinks that Chinese people have. Just all that practical stuff that you would hope to know once you started or once you've learned a solid amount of characters.
Also, in terms of practicality, you also mentioned how to write. You also included technology, like how to use characters in your Mac or your Windows, so that since most of the interaction now is online, it's really useful, right?
Right. Yeah, there's also some parts in the book that show you, that explain to you how to set up your computer to type Chinese, how to type Chinese, because I mean, there's no way to type it like you would in English.
Right.
There's no letters, so basically you use the pinyin, and if you don't know what that is, that's in the book too.
Right. So yeah, thank you very much, Eric, for your time. This has been a very eventful interview. I hope a lot of people would learn your techniques and find Chinese characters a little bit more friendly.
Yes, I hope so too, and thank you very much for having me here. I hope people find Chinese as interesting as I do, and that they'll go ahead and take the plunge and have fun.
Okay. So thank you, and everyone, thanks for joining us, and I'll share a link to Aaron's book below, and hope you check it out. Till next time.